Barbara Pierce Bush is the wife of the 41st President of the United States, George H. W. Bush, and served as First Lady of the United States from 1989 to 1993. She is the mother of the 43rd President, George W. Bush, and of the 43rd Governor of Florida, Jeb Bush. Previously she had served as Second Lady of the United States from 1981 to 1989. Barbara Pierce was born in New York, New York, attended Rye Country Day School from 1931 to 1937, and is an alumna of Ashley Hall School in Charleston, South Carolina. She met George Herbert Walker Bush at age 16, and the two married in Rye, New York in 1945. While he was on leave during his deployment as a naval officer in World War II. They had 6 children together. The Bush family soon moved to Midland, Texas. As George Bush entered political life, Barbara raised their children. As wife of the Vice President and then President, Barbara Bush has supported and worked to advance the cause of universal literacy. She founded the Barbara Bush Foundation for Family Literacy while First Lady. Since leaving the White House, she has continued to advance this cause. Early life. Barbara Pierce was born at Booth Memorial Hospital in the borough of Queens, in New York City, and raised in the suburban town of Rye, New York. She was the third child of Pauline and her husband Marvin Pierce, who later became president of McCall Corporation, the publisher of the popular women's magazines Redbook and McCall's. Her siblings include Martha Pierce Rafferty, James Pierce, and Scott Pierce. Her ancestor Thomas Pierce, an early New England colonist, was also an ancestor of Franklin Pierce, the 14th President of the United States. She is the 4th cousin, 4 times removed, and the 2nd cousin, 5 times removed, of President Franklin Pierce. Barbara attended Rye Country Day School from 1931 to 1937 and later boarding school at Ashley Hall in Charleston, South Carolina from 1940 to 1943. She was athletic as a youth and enjoyed swimming, tennis, and bike riding. Her interest in reading began early in her life. She recalls gathering with her family during the evenings and reading together. Marriage and family. She met George Herbert Walker Bush, a student at Phillips Academy in Andover, Massachusetts at age 16 during a dance over Christmas vacation. After a year and a half, the two became engaged to be married, just before he went off to World War II as a Navy torpedo bomber pilot. He named 3 of his planes after her: Barbara, Barbara II, and Barbara III. When he returned on leave, she had dropped out of Smith College in Northampton, Massachusetts. 2 weeks later, on January 6, 1945, they were married at the First Presbyterian Church in Rye, New York. For the first 8 months of their marriage, the Bushes moved around the eastern United States, to places including Michigan, Maryland, and Virginia, as George Bush's Navy squadron training required his presence at bases in such states. Over the next 13 years, George and Barbara Bush had 6 children. George W. Bush, Pauline Robinson, Robin Bush, John Ellis, Jeb Bush, Neil Mallon Bush, Marvin Pierce Bush, and Dorothy Doro Bush Koch. From their 5 living children, they have 17 grandchildren and 4 great-grandchildren. Texas years. After the war ended, George Bush graduated from Yale University and the young family soon moved to Odessa, Texas, where Bush entered the oil business. They moved to several small suburbs around Los Angeles, California, before settling in Midland, Texas, in 1950. The Bushes would move some 29 times during their marriage. Over time, Bush would build a business in the oil industry and found the successful Zapata Corporation. Barbara raised her children while her husband was usually away on business. In 1953, the Bush's daughter Robin died of leukemia. It severely affected Barbara Bush, and is the incident that is credited with beginning to turn her hair from a light brown color to chalk white. While in Texas, in 1959, George Bush was elected Harris County Republican Party chairman, in the first of what would become many elections. His first run for a prominent political office was in 1964, for U.S. Senator from Texas, and although he lost, the exposure of the Bush family put George and Barbara Bush on the national scene. A couple on the move, Bush would be elected as a U.S. representative in Congress from Texas 2 years later in 1966. While her husband campaigned, Barbara raised her children, occasionally joining him on the trail. Over the ensuing years, George Bush would be elected or appointed to several different positions in the U.S. Congress or the executive branch, or government-related posts, and Barbara Bush would accompany him every step of the way. As the wife of a congressman, Barbara immersed herself in projects that piqued her interest, included various charities and Republican women's groups in Washington, D.C., though her husband lost a second bid for the Senate in 1970. President Richard Nixon appointed him the United States Ambassador to the United Nations, which enabled Barbara to begin forming relationships in New York with prominent diplomats. As the Watergate scandal heated up in 1973, Nixon asked Bush to become chairman of the Republican National Committee. Barbara advised her husband to reject the offer because of the harsh political climate, but he accepted anyway. Nixon's successor, Gerald R. Ford, appointed Bush head of the U.S. Liaison Office in the People's Republic of China in 1974, and thus the Bushes moved internationally. Barbara enjoyed her time spent in China, and often rode bicycles with her husband to explore the cities and regions that few Americans had traveled to. Just 3 years later, Bush was called back to the U.S. to serve as Director of Central Intelligence during a crucial time of legal uncertainty for the agency. Her husband was not allowed to share pertinent aspects of his job with Barbara, as they were classified. The ensuing sense of isolation, coupled with her perception that she was not achieving her goals while other women of her time were, plunged her into a depression. She did not seek professional help and instead began delivering speeches and presentations about her time spent in the closed-off China and began volunteering at a hospice. Barbara Bush defended her husband's experience and personal qualities when he announced his candidacy for President of the United States in 1980. She caused a stir when she said that she supported ratification of the Equal Rights Amendment and was pro-choice on abortion. This placed her slightly at odds with the conservative wing of the Republican Party, led by California Governor Ronald Reagan. Reagan would receive the presidential nomination over her husband. Reagan, however, chose Bush to be his running mate, and the team was elected in 1980. Second Lady of the United States. Barbara Bush's 8 years as Second Lady allowed her to become a common household name. She took an interest in literacy issues after her son Neil was diagnosed with dyslexia and began working with several different literacy organizations. She spent much time researching and learning about the factors that contributed to illiteracy. She believed homelessness was also connected to illiteracy, and the efforts underway to combat both. She traveled around the country and the world, both with the vice president on official trips and by herself. In 1984, she wrote her children's book about her family, told from the point of view of her dog C. Fred, entitled C. Fred's Story. She donated all proceeds from the book to literacy charities. Now comfortable speaking in front of groups, she routinely spoke to promote issues she believed in and became famous for expressing a sense of humor and self-deprecating wit. During the 1984 presidential campaign, Barbara made headlines when she told the press that she could not say on television what she thought of vice presidential candidate Geraldine Ferraro. But it rhymes with rich. She later apologized to Ferraro. In 1988, Vice President Bush announced his candidacy for president to succeed Reagan. By this time, Barbara had experienced 2 presidential campaigns. but broke new ground by becoming the second candidate's spouse to speak at the National Party convention that nominated her husband. She promised voters that she would be a traditional First Lady and campaigned actively for her husband. The campaign at times focused on the large Bush family, and contrasted her with the First Lady, Nancy Reagan, by highlighting her interest in domestic staples such as church, gardening, and time spent with family while placing less emphasis on style, sense and fashion. She drew attention to both her famous white hair and disinterest in wearing designer clothes. She generally avoided discussion of political issues during the campaign, particularly those on which she and her husband differed, and those closely involved with the campaign have reported that she was actively involved in campaign strategy. Bush was elected in November 1988 and sworn in on January 20, 1989, and the nation had a new First Lady. First Lady of the United States. Barbara Bush's cause as First Lady was family literacy, as it was when she was Second Lady, calling it the most important issue we have. She became involved with many literacy organizations, served on literacy committees and chaired many reading organizations. Eventually, she helped develop the Barbara Bush Foundation for Family Literacy. She is dedicated to eliminating the generational cycle of illiteracy in America by supporting programs where parents and their young children are able to learn together. During the early 1980s, after statistics had shown that foreign-born immigrants from Latin America had nearly quintupled just since 1960, statistics showed that 35 million adults could not read above the 8th grade level and that 23 million were not able to read beyond a 4th grade level. Mrs. Bush appeared on The Oprah Winfrey Show to discuss the situation and spoke regularly on Mrs. Bush's Story Time, a national radio program that stressed the importance of reading aloud to children. Today, her children Jeb Bush and Dora Bush Koch serve as co-chairs of the Barbara Bush Foundation for Family Literacy. Mrs. Bush remains active in the foundation and serves as honorary chair. She was also active with the White House Historical Association and worked to revitalize the White House Preservation Fund, which she renamed the White House Endowment Trust. The trust raises funds for the ongoing refurbishment and restoration of the White House. She met her goal of raising $25 million towards the endowment. The White House resident staff generally found Barbara Bush to be the friendliest and most easy to get along with of the First Ladies they would deal with. Bush was known for her affection for her pet English Springer Spaniel Millie and wrote a child's book about Millie's new litter of puppies. She even included Millie in her official White House portrait, painted by Candace Whittemore Lovely. Barbara Bush became the first U.S. First Lady to become a recipient of the Henry G. Freeman, Jr. Pin Money Fund, receiving $36,000, most of which she gave to favorite charities. She was struck every day by how much things had changed for her and her husband since becoming President and First Lady. As opposed to a limousine, Bush tried to use a smaller car and travel by train and commercial airplane for out-of-town trips. However, Bush was partially opposed in her wishes by the heads of her Secret Service detail, who agreed to the small car but did not approve to the commercial traveling given the number of threats to the First Lady being higher than that of the Vice President. Despite their opposition, what put Bush most off was the fact that her flights would be delayed while agents checked out the planes and luggage. The plane Bush traveled on was nicknamed Great Star, in honor of the Leukemia Foundation her husband and Hugh Liedtke founded after her daughter, Robin, died. Her Wellesley College commencement address, given in 1990, was listed as number 45 in American Rhetoric's Top 100 Speeches of the 20th Century. During her husband's 1992 presidential campaign, Barbara Bush stated that abortion and homosexuality are personal matters and argued that the Republican Party platform should not take a stand on it. saying that the personal things should be left out of, in my opinion, platforms and conventions. Her personal views on abortion were not known, although her friends reported at that time that she privately supported abortion rights. She explained, "I hate abortions, but I just could not make that choice for someone else." Bush disclosed she was suffering from an overactive thyroid ailment known as Graves' disease when she lived at the White House. George H.W. Bush came down with the same malady not long after his wife. It is rare for two biologically unrelated people in the same household to develop Graves' disease within 2 years of each other. The Bush dog, Millie, came down with Graves' disease, too, although there are reports that she had a different autoimmune disease, lupus. Because of the remarkable coincidence of 3 cases of autoimmune disease in one household, the Secret Service tested the water in the White House, at Camp David, at the vice president's residence, and at Walker's Point for lithium and iodine, 2 substances known to cause thyroid problems. Bush was more popular than her immediate predecessor Nancy Reagan and successor Hillary Clinton because she carefully avoided controversy and took very few positions publicly on issues.